webinar. So first of all, I would like to wish all of you a very happy National Wildlife Week. So as we all know, our Wildlife Week is going to go on for the next couple of days, starting today. My name is Karen Pereira, and I am from Wildlife and Conservation Biology, or WCB Research Foundation. We are a non-profit organization completely dedicated to science-based and honest wildlife conservation, and as well as outreach activities through research and development across India. So this year we will be kickstarting our Wildlife Week with this inaugural talk by Mr. Girish Punjabi. He is a conservation biologist from the Wildlife Conservation Trust, as well as a member of the IUCN Canet Specialist Group and the Dhol Working Group. So, Mr. Girish here has had a decade's worth of experience working on various projects involving carnivores and has spent extensive time in various parts of India, especially in the Western Ghats, studying wildlife. So, on behalf of the entire WCB team, I take this pleasure to welcome Mr. Girish today and request him to begin his talk whenever he is ready. Thank you.
Thank you, Karan. Thank you so much. Thank you, WCB Research Foundation, Dr. Nishit, and the entire team for inviting me to the inaugural talk for Wildlife Week. And yeah, without much delay, I think I'll begin my talk. Okay, so when Dr. Nishit and Karen and folks at WCB approached me for a talk, I readily agreed because it's been quite a while. I've been giving talks to students and generally in the field to school kids for awareness workshops, but rarely do I talk with other NGOs. And I'm glad that today I got the opportunity to do that. So yeah, before we begin, since today is Gandhi Jayanti, I think a quote I was looking for online really clicked with me, and that was, the future depends on what you do today. I think all the more this is important for us to imbibe and remember that all our actions today are going to determine what's going to happen in the future. So, you may be an experienced person in the field, you may be an absolute novice, but all your actions, every step that you take today will determine your own future, as well as, the society that we live in. If the society says that we want to do something concrete about the environment today, tomorrow we will live in a cleaner and better environment. Yeah, if we choose not to, then we won't live in a good environment then. So yeah, with that I begin my talk, which I've titled Conservation in the Anthropocene. Some people may have a question as to what the Anthropocene is. So basically, the times that we live in now, humans dominate every sphere, and whatever little wildlife habitat we have remaining, even that has a lot of pressure because of human development. So working today in the field of conservation is far more difficult. There are immense number of challenges, and it is very, very difficult, especially for new people who are joining this field. You will face a lot of challenges. So I've worked for more than a decade now. I started out in 2010, and I've learned a few things which I thought I should share. So I'm going to show you some pictures. I'm going to show you some of my experiences. I'm going to show some data. And I'm also going to, most importantly, talk about what I have learned over the last decade that I've worked in the field. Most importantly, this is for the young bunch. If there are senior people in the audience, you can also probably relate to what I'm saying. But for the younger lot who are going to get into this field or are planning to make a career in this field, I think this talk will help you all a little bit at least. So I started my journey when I was doing my master's in wildlife biology, and that was way back in 2008 to 10. So in 2009, we were in South India. We were in Bhadra Tiger Reserve, and we were being taught how to sample and survey on line transects. And me, a colleague of mine, and a local field consultant three of us were walking on a line transect, and I was leading the team. And I had a compass, and my colleague had a binocular, and we had range finders, and we were supposed to collect systematic data on wild herbivores. And while we were walking, we were almost a kilometer on the line transect, and suddenly, at about 20 meters distance from us, I saw a trunk coming out of the bush, and immediately realized that it was some animal. And in like a few seconds, I saw the head, just as the photo that you see. Similarly, an elephant's head popped out of the bush, and I thought I was the first one to see it. So I turned behind to tell my colleagues that there is an elephant 20 meters ahead, so maybe we should stop and go back. And as soon as I turned behind, I saw that my colleague and my field consultant were already running, and they were almost 50 feet away from me, and they were running like mad. So the first learning I got very early on in my life, while I was studying in my masters, was that when you're new to the wilds yourself, please accompany people who are less frightened than you are. Otherwise, you will be left in limbo, just like I was over there. Of course, nothing untoward happened, which was fortunate. I also turned and started running with them because we had to abandon the line as there was an elephant on it. But such things might happen, especially early on in your career. You might, especially if you're looking to, work in areas where there is large mammalian wildlife, you may end up interacting with large species, and it's quite scary. So yeah, this is a young picture of mine. I unfortunately don't have many photos from a decade ago. I could dig out one from my archives, and this was in 2010 and 11. I just finished my master's, and I started working in the northern parts of the Western Ghats. And I was able to work on a project that was already going on under Dr. Advait Edgaonkar. He's an assistant professor at IIFM now. So I managed to do some field work in this part of the Western Ghats, and we covered around 7,000 square kilometers of area in 5 districts in Western Maharashtra. And in 2010, a new tiger reserve was declared there called the Sahyadri Tiger Reserve. So this survey of ours was like the foremost survey, looking at the entire landscape, stretching from that tiger reserve all the way up till the border of Goa and Karnataka. So we actually walked quite a bit. Me, my colleagues, volunteers, forest department staff, all of us as part of the survey wanted to understand the distribution of 4 large carnivores. You can see the pictures on the screen. It was the tiger, wild dog, leopard, and sloth bear. You find all 4 species in this area. So the idea was to understand the distribution of these species and try and understand the extent of occurrence. And these designs have been used quite widely across India. In fact, now it has become regular protocol to do this by the forest department itself. So this is the kind of information we generated. We looked at what's called as, in scientific terms, what's called as occupancy probabilities. So the redder the grids that you see on the right, the higher the occupancy probability of that particular animal. So this is for the dhole or the Asiatic wild dog. So you can see wherever it's much redder, the distribution probability or the occupancy probability is much higher. So this was kind of seminal work in the landscape because nobody had actually done any systematic surveys in this area. We only had anecdotal information and information from forest staff that some particular species occur, some species have been seen, but there were no systematic surveys done before this. So very soon, within a year or two of doing my master's, I realized that all the theory that I learned was great. I did learn a lot during my master's, but the kind of learning I got while I was doing my own work in the field, walking those mountains, collecting that data, and then coming back and sitting and analyzing that information that I had collected. That kind of learning was irreplaceable. So, no amount of theory, you can learn whatever you want, but till you actually go out and practice things, till you actually go out and do your own studies, you're not going to learn as much. So I think this is a funda I go by even now in my life. I prefer to learn by doing things. Is everybody able to hear me?
Yes, you're audible.
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. I'll proceed. So, once I finished that work, I realized that I'm learning a lot while I'm in the field collecting data. So I got an opportunity to work with WCS India for a short while, and they had a Indo-Norwegian collaborative project where I could do some study again in the same landscape, but this time using camera traps. So I was very interested in one particular part of the landscape where I had found tiger signs, where I had found leopard signs and wild dog signs. And I was like, why not try and do some camera trap monitoring and, at least understand the minimum number of individuals of leopards, of tigers, because those are species you can actually identify with their rosette or their stripe patterns. So I started doing this study, but that time we had really old camera traps. They were a model called Deer Cam, which actually ran on film rolls. It was not the digital camera trap makes that you have nowadays. And of course, they were available, but they were expensive, and most people didn't have them. So because of the scientist I worked with, she had these cameras with her readily available. I used them in the field, and the photo qualities were all right. It was great. The roll cameras was great, but they were horrible cams in terms of the trigger speeds and the detections. Most of the times we would get tails of animals. The animal had moved away, and then the camera trap would capture an image. So these are some of the few good captures that we got, which I'm sharing with you on the screen. These were some of my first camera trap pictures. So we had some bunch of leopards, we had bears. I didn't put a lot here though, but we had wild dogs as well. That's a mouse deer on the right. It's the smallest deer species, and it's found largely in peninsular India. Uh, then you have the common palm civet below. But while I was doing that study, I realized that there is a lot of threat in this landscape because of a lot of quarrying that is happening. And I'm sorry for these poor quality photos, but I had a very small handheld camera which I used to use that time in the field. And but this is unfortunately the images I captured, where large swaths of forests were being chopped down or had already been chopped down and clear felled and burnt, and they were being converted to estates of rubber, of mainly cash crops. And till today, you can see these scars in the Western Ghats. Wherever production landscapes have come in, large amounts of forest has been lost. Yeah, again a bad image, but you can see the forest, the standing forest on the north, and along the lower sides of the hill slopes, it's been completely cut down and mostly planted by rubber and some other species of shrubbery. Yeah, but these are largely monoculture. So, on the top, if you look at the forest, it'll have probably 100, 200, 300 species of trees and shrubs. And as soon as you come down into the estates, you will find only one species of tree, which is rubber. So, you've decimated all the biodiversity that was there by cutting off that habitat. And interestingly, because these were large estates, I saw that people were also electric fencing 200 acres of land, 300 acres of land along the mountain slopes. In the middle of the forest, you suddenly have a clearing that is fenced. So, what are animals going to do? They are not going to be able to cross over from one side to the next. They either have to go all the way up to the top of the hillock, cross over to the other side, and then descend again, which is painful, right? So, clearly, there were impacts. And everywhere I went, people had made roads through the forest, and it was basically being hammered left, right, and center. And yeah, I'm sharing this image. You might think, oh, but this looks like, there's so much tree cover. But if you actually look at this image, the region behind is the forest, and the region ahead is a completely monocultured area of rubber. So it might look green to you, and in fact, they were earlier selling these places as green gold, but it's actually nothing is green here. There is no local biodiversity left, and all the biodiverse areas have long been finished in many of these rubber estates. So I basically in 2013, when I was doing that work, I started writing about it. I wrote an article in Down to Earth saying, because I was also seeing a lot of tiger signs in the area and the way the habitat was being damaged, it was really affecting me. So I started writing about it, and I started, approaching the forest department. I started collaborating with a lot of local social activists, environmental activists. And with the forest department, we actually put up a better make of camera trap in some parts, and we managed to get the first tiger photos in the area. And these are the original three pictures, the original three tigers I got. This one's a little blurred, but yeah, but we could still identify that there were three different individuals. And these were the first pictures we got from that valley, which was very exciting to me. And now we had hard evidence that, tigers are using that area. And so, the forest department took a lot of interest. Chief conservator himself came to the field and, encouraged me to do more work in the landscape and, think about whether we can, probably upgrade that area. That area was entirely reserve forest or private forest. So how could we upgrade that into a protected area was the idea. Now, I'm going to show a picture of a dead animal. Some of you may not like it, so I'll remove it quickly. So one of the years in 2015, when we were going into the valley, on the right, there's a dead goat killed by a tiger. I'll remove that. So while we were walking in this area, in this valley, and the dam waters had actually gone down, and it was fairly dry that time. The tiger had killed a huge gaur in the area, and we saw a lot of pug marks, dotting the entire landscape, and figured out that it's going to come back to the kill. So we set up camera traps on it, and yeah, very interestingly, we got three cubs as well. Yeah, but the minute the cubs saw the camera trap, they were spooked and they ran away. But anyway, we got a lot of videos of the female, of the cubs, which was very interesting because now this was an area where nobody had done much research. And I ended up being there, and I ended up documenting a breeding population, a small breeding population of tigers, two individuals who were actually breeding there, which was very good information for us, for our future plans. So I decided that, this information is great and I should go ahead and engage with the forest department. And thanks to the very, very collaborative officers at that point of time, I managed to take a lot of trainings for the forest staff. We collaboratively did a lot of monitoring for these individual tigers. So these are some pictures of me engaging in 2015, and also did some workshops with civil society. There were some environmental and social activists who were fighting a dam in their village. There were others who were fighting mining in a larger number of villages. And there were some researchers, there were some local tourism bodies. So, tried to interact with them. We, in fact, made a tiny little network of our own, and we attended public hearings of some projects as well, gave in our submissions. It was a lot of learning for me. And at the same time, I decided that I should also start publishing some of my work. So I published some research papers, I published some articles on, popular media channels, and tried to get as much attention as I could, because the idea was that that particular area in southern Maharashtra needed protection. It was at the border of Karnataka and Goa, and if that area would get destroyed because of plantations or anything else, the entire connectivity of the northern Western Ghats would get severed. So because I knew the importance of that area, I tried to pitch for more and more work. And we also discovered a lot of interesting animals. Like we discovered the brown palm civet occurring in the area, the striped neck mongoose, which was not recorded from the parts of Maharashtra. So even these tiny notes made a difference. Like all the work that we did, whatever new information we got, we tried to publish it in various journals or media articles. So we also found leopard cats occurring and in that area. So we published a note regarding that as well. So, tiny things. It was not some big fat papers in Nature and Science and, all the big journals that you have. It was tiny notes in IUCN journals and, in Indian journals. At least that information was out there somewhere. And yeah, this was 100 square kilometer area. I've marked it out in red on a Google map. And so the idea was to try and get this area protected as a wildlife sanctuary. And so the forest department got to work, and they started doing a survey of what all land was governed by them. There was also a lot of private forest here, which was considered to be deemed forest. So they got the status out of those things. It was quite a meticulous activity they did for a good 6-8 months. The local people were also consulted. So the advantage of getting this area upgraded was that there were no people living in these valleys anymore. So because the dam had come up, around 7 villages from this particular valley were completely relocated to other parts of the tehsil. So there were no villages here. Just that the land ownership was still not transferred to the government. So that could be done. So at least if you upgrade the status of the land to a sanctuary, it would have helped. So anyway, I was very positive about it. So early on in my career, within 5 years of me starting work, this information was going to help, and there was going to be a protected area declaration. I was really thrilled that I could contribute to conservation in some way. So this learning, I think, is also important for many of you who might be budding researchers. Your scientific data, your robust information, your observations, your local collaborations, all of these things will help conservation. Even if conservation is difficult in today's age and time, your data and observations, when you have them put in a systematic manner somewhere, it does help pitch a case for a place. So it could be a small place, it could be a small sacred grove, it could be a small 10 square kilometer area, it could be 100 square kilometer area, whatever it is, whatever your objectives are for conservation, the data really helps. The more data you have, the more systematic data you have, you can pitch and you can make a better case for that place. So this is an important learning, and I think some of you can take a leaf out of this. So anyway, the forest department was doing its job. I was hoping that a notification would come out very soon under the Wildlife Protection Act and a new protected area will be declared. But nevertheless, whatever happened, I said, let me not stop doing my research. So I did research on large herbivores and we tried to understand their populations. So we published another paper in a journal. And I also started continuing with my opportunistic camera trapping with the forest department. So in 2016, we found that the resident female in that valley is pregnant again. And you can see in the picture on the left, she has a full blown belly and she's going to give birth to cubs. So that was amazing information coming in that, she's regularly, going to give a litter of cubs. And interestingly, in 2017, we got cubs again. And this is very interesting because till now, nobody even knew of the existence of these tigers. There was no attention. The land was being diverted left, right, and center. And, basically everybody thought this is marginal habitat. I don't think there'll be any wildlife here. That is the kind of feedback I would get from some senior folk I spoke to. But it wasn't the case. There was a lot of wildlife, and I thought that, all the important research that I'm doing is actually going to result in something, and I was very pleased about it. But over the next 2 years, I realized that things were not going to happen. So the reason I'm showing you all these two circles, and one is a white circle and one is a black circle, is this is how we look at things in most cases. When we look at wildlife conservation, we think, Arey, it is so simple. Once you know there is information and that habitat is remaining and you have the data behind it, the government should act. The forest department should act and should do something about it. But it's not as simple as we think it is. We think in black and white, exactly like these two circles. But the reality is that there is a lot of gray. So, politics doesn't work in black and white. Decisions by people's representatives don't work in black and white. They have a lot more considerations in their head, especially that of extractive industry. So they are not going to let things happen. So, for a good many years, I tried and tried and tried, and I realized that it's hopeless. The local MLA is completely opposed to it, and neither is there much public support. So you're not going to get anything like this very easily. And I kind of gave up, for a year or two, I even moved away from the landscape. I was a biologist at Ranthambore Tiger Reserve, and I worked with the department there. Anyway, I won't talk about that now. But yeah, my biggest learning after 7 years of working in the field was this, that, I could do all the research in the world, but without strong political will in support of conservation, there will not be any meaningful decisions. However, as conservationists, we should not lose heart. As conservationists, even if you're a budding conservationist and you are trying to do something, persistence tends to pay. So be persistent, continue doing your work, continue holding that cause in mind and doing your work towards it. So 2019, I was back to the Western Ghats. I joined the Wildlife Conservation Trust as a conservation biologist, and I started my own vertical in the Western Ghats. And we started doing work again in the landscape. I said, okay, fine, I have this background data. Now I need to redo something. So basically, the survey that I had done 10 years ago, I wanted to repeat that after 10 years. So 2019-20, we embarked on a study to reassess the status of large carnivores. So we had data from 10 years ago, and now after 10 years, what's been the change? How has the tiger population changed? How has the dhole population changed? How has the sloth bear population changed? So we wanted to ask these questions. So we went out into the field and we sampled 44 large size grid cells, and we walked anywhere from 4 to 40 kilometers, depending on the forest habitat that was there. And we did this intensive survey. Unfortunately, during 2020, there was a lockdown in the country because of COVID. Everybody's experienced that. So our work also got stuck for a while till things could open up again. But nevertheless, I got to see these phenomenal landscapes again. And this is a picture of the Ghats taken in the peak of summer around end of April. And you can see the amount of water that is falling from the forest. It's just amazing. If somebody asks you what is the importance of these mountains, it's this. It's the water that it gives us. And these are cloud forests. So if you actually go there in the monsoons, you will find that the entire high altitude areas are cloaked in clouds, which also, kind of condense and fall down as rain. And yeah, there is an amazing transition. So if you go to the higher altitude areas, like the plateau you can see on the right, this is a basaltic plateau. And it's a fairly large amount of grassland that is available for grazers like gore. And as soon as you descend into the valley, the forest becomes semi-evergreen to moist deciduous. So this sort of transition is seen, these sort of edge habitats are seen very commonly in the northwestern Ghats region. But there are also a lot of threats in terms of human infrastructure, such as roads, and a lot of them are expanding now. In fact, in the last 10 years, a lot have already expanded, and now they're continuing to expand them. So this sort of severs connectivity in the landscape as well. Plus, there is a lot of interaction between people and wildlife. So here in this image, you can see that there are two gaur, and it's the peak of summer, and they're drinking out of a drying water hole, and then behind them are cattle, livestock. So, you have disease transmission between the two species where diseases from livestock are transferred to gaur, or it could also be the other way around, actually. So these interactions are there between people, their livestock, and wildlife. So irrespective of all these threats, we documented all of that. We collected some robust data, and over 10 years, we realized some very interesting results. We found that actually the two endangered large carnivores that we have in the landscape, the tiger and the wild dog, occupancy has actually increased. So the distribution has increased in the landscape, which was really good information for us. And for the leopard and sloth bear, for the leopard, actually, there was no change. The leopard was widely found even earlier in the landscape. And even after 10 years, it was occupying the same amount of area. So there was not much change. But for bears, we found that there was a very slight increase. So occupancy didn't change by much, but there was a little bit of improvement. So I've just showed you maps of where all we got signs of these different animals. So you can see in the left, I've shown you tiger signs. So you can see that in the southern areas, tiger signs are more common. And as you move further north in the landscape, in fact, towards the tiger reserve, tiger signs became lesser and lesser. But if you look at wild dogs, that was not the case. So wild dogs are doing well in the tiger reserve and even outside of it, and even inside the wildlife sanctuary here. So, they're doing fairly better than tigers were. But if you look at bears, if you look at the left map, we found this stark pattern to be consistent across 10 years. So over 10 years, when we did this occupancy study, we found that sloth bears are restricted into these two subpopulations. And there is this huge gap of almost 40 kilometers length where there are no bears. So you're not finding any signs of bears in this patchy forest in the middle. So this population in the Sahyadri Tiger Reserve is actually completely isolated from the southern population. That was very interesting. And we actually corroborated this by camera trap surveys also. So we found evidence that these two populations are completely isolated from each other. Now, of course, I don't have genetic data to confirm this, but if there has been isolation for 40, 50 years, which I'm assuming it is, uh, the population in the tiger reserve is at much higher threat of becoming locally extinct. But if you look at leopards, they don't show this pattern. Leopards are all over the place. In fact, they're outside our study areas also. They are there in sugarcane fields to the east. They are there in the fragmented forests of the Konkan areas on the west. So, these sort of studies actually give you a lot of information at landscape scales, which is what helps management at the end. And while we were doing this study, something very interesting happened. Is that the government in Maharashtra, along with the forest department, decided to declare that area called Tilari, which we were trying to declare as a wildlife sanctuary, they decided to declare it as a conservation reserve, a smaller part of it as a conservation reserve. So that was like, it was very amazing for me that, something we tried to do for so many years. And I had honestly given up. I thought nothing's going to happen and things are not going to change. And then all of a sudden, suddenly somebody took interest, some respected biologists and researchers and forest department officers took interest and decided that we need to do something about it, and they got it declared, notified as a conservation reserve. And this happened during COVID. And then even while COVID was happening and everybody was busy trying to save themselves because it was such a horrible disease, the government and the forest department was silently working to declare a lot more conservation reserves. So in this particular region of Western Maharashtra, they declared, they at least approved 9 conservation reserve, of which 7 were notified. 2 have not been notified as yet, but hopefully very soon they will be. But what happened or what resulted at the end of the work was that my work was used as the basis to understand that this corridor is important and that something needs to be done to protect this corridor. So at least at the end of all the work, something resulted out of it. It could be, a conservation reserve is not as well protected as a wildlife sanctuary is, but at least it's something. If any large project needs to come in, it needs to undergo clearances from the wildlife boards in the state as well as the national level. So in some way, there is a layer of protection that is added to the corridor areas as well. And these are corridor habitats. I'll just explain what I mean by that. So if you look at the figure on the left, a corridor could be any piece of land. It could even be an agricultural area. So for example, there are 2 populations and one of these animals wants to move from this to that place, from the south to the north. It could even pass through an agricultural piece of land. So in that case, the agricultural land will also be a corridor. But what I prefer to use in these areas is corridor habitat, because we know for a fact that animals are using them to disperse as well as they're resident in these areas. So that's why corridor habitat makes a lot more sense. So all of these were corridor habitats that were upgraded into conservation reserves. So in 2023, we started doing a camera trap survey of the entire corridor habitat, all these conservation reserves. We thought, let's try and figure out the minimum populations of, leopards here. Let's look at how many tigers there are. And if at all, we can use new models to understand how many dholes are there. That, of course, was difficult to do, but yeah, we attempted that. So yeah, this is a photo of my field consultant with the forest staff, and I'm really amazed that many of these young forest staff are so keen and so interested to know what's coming in their camera traps. They're very, very curious to understand if a tiger has moved, if a leopard has moved, if a wild dog has moved, or even if there is human intrusion in their forest areas. So, I find a lot of hope when I see these pictures of young people coming to the field and collecting systematic, robust data, especially forest staff and young researchers. And in one of the video cameras that we had put in, we got another 2 cubs in one area. So, here we had evidence that tigers are breeding in many of these areas, so-called fragmented habitats, which people would write off and say, "Arey, yahan to kuch nahi hoga. This is a very, very sad habitat. It's all fragmented. So much pressure is there." Still, animals will find a way to survive, and animals will find a way to use it. As long as we humans try and understand them and put this data forth to policymakers, these habitats are quickly going to get lost. That is why hard data, evidence comes in very, very handy. Now nobody can come and tell me, "अरे इसमें तो कुछ भी नहीं रहेगा." Then I have 10 years of data to show you यहाँ पे क्या है या what is not there. So look at this video here. At around 12 in the afternoon, we deployed some camera traps, and me, the forest department staff, we all just walked away from there. And within an hour and a half, a sloth bear came down from the same trail, and the bear came very close to the camera trap and sniffed it. And as soon as it sniffed it, I think it sniffed us people, so it ran away from there. But I find this behavior very interesting because it shows how bears, who have such a bad reputation amongst people as animals that come and attack people and even kill people, maul people, are avoidant of humans. The minute he sniffed people, he ran away from that place. So, such interesting behaviors are also seen in our camera traps. And here you'll see very interesting behavior by a pair of doles. So he's trying to go to the right, but then he sniffs something. And he gets a bit disturbed and he goes away. Then the other dole goes there. That dole also sniffs something, figures out that the first dole is right, and then she also moves away. And the entire pack goes the other way. And well, you understand why, because you have tigers co-occurring in the same area, and this tigress had probably moved from there earlier in St. Mark, and now she's moving back again. So this video came after 2 days after the dole video. So we know that there are interactions and there are behaviors that we would normally not observe. You don't even see wildlife in these parts. They're so elusive and they're so secretive. But through your camera traps, through our camera traps, actually, we get to see so much interesting behavior in the landscape of how these species are co-occurring, how they are sharing space. And these are not areas that are really well protected. There are people coming inside for fishing. There is hunting happening once in a while. There are people coming in to do all sorts of things. So even with all those disturbances, the wildlife is hanging in there. And also some very interesting species like this small clawed otter. It's the smallest otter in the world, actually. And you find them in the Western Ghats. And, we happen to put the camera trap on a river bed, or on a river, actually, stream. And when the water was drying, these otters came into view. So, my study is one thing. I've figured out that from a lot of our research, we've collected good data, robust data. But then how do we end up protecting these habitats now that they are conservation reserves? The forest department, which is a territorial forest department. So these are not, national park or wildlife sanctuary or tiger reserve areas. These are all outside the PAs, actually, or recently declared conservation reserves. So protection is still quite weak. So what was necessarily required was training the forest staff in the territorial areas, trying to train them in wildlife monitoring. Even inside the tiger reserves, we train the staff. These are all WCT's flagship programs that we are doing in the Sahyadris. And WCT actually does this all over India in multiple states and trains almost thousands of staff. So in the Sahyadris as well, we've done trainings on wildlife law enforcement, which also has basics of forensics, and also the new amendments that come into the act. The forest staff should know all those things. So we dedicatedly take those intensive training workshops for them. And also that staff safety is paramount because a lot of them live in very tough areas. In these villages, you don't have a lot of facilities. So if something happens to you, you go into the forest for your beat patrol, you fall down, you break a leg, you break your hand, you break your back, a gaur attacks you or some other animal attacks you. What are you supposed to do when you have these situations? So giving them training to manage trauma or to manage emergency cases is also something we do as an organization. And these are some photos from the Western Ghats, but we do this all across India and most of the major tiger reserves and protected areas. And also giving them some, essential things, small things, not something too large, but, like giving them jackets or, bags, those sort of things which they need in the field so that their motivation levels remain high. These areas are very tough to work in. You might think that it's nice to work in the Western Ghats, but it's a very, very mountainous area. Your beats can only be checked by trekking every day, and you will lose motivation if you're working in such areas where it rains for 6 months of the year, where there are leeches in the forest, where there are ticks at you, biting at you, all those issues kind of demotivate the staff. So kind of motivating them to do their duties by engaging with them, by providing them essential equipment. But of course, we don't, as WCT believes in a multi-pronged approach. We don't stop at that. We also engage with school kids, and I know that WCB Research Foundation also does this. It does a lot of awareness activities, which is great because that is the need of the hour. These future generations really need to be involved when they are young. As soon as you start involving them when they are young, the perception changes. I think today I see myself as an example, and I think if somebody wouldn't have engaged with me when I was young, nobody came to talk about wildlife, I probably wouldn't have gotten interested. So because somebody did that, I got interested. So yeah, we try and take these workshops, doing some fun activities so that they also learn about wildlife, and they also, show them a documentary or to create awareness in their minds about the wild heritage that they have right next to their villages, which they're probably not even aware of. And our work also has policy implications. So in the Sayadris where we work, and this is a very small program compared to what WCT does in central India, but still, wherever we work, I think the idea is that we have policy implications. So what we did in the Sayadris is that for the tiger reserve, the tiger conservation plan is revised every 10 years. So we try to use these research foundation findings and pitched it to the forest department. So they actually increased the number of villages in the corridor from 40 to over 300. So once this becomes part of a government plan, there is some legal protection coming in. So there are a lot of other pressures on this landscape from bauxite mining, from iron ore mining, from new railway lines, from new transmission lines, from new highway expansion. All of these things, some of this will eventually happen and we cannot prevent or avoid anything. But at least if you have something in the government documents, it can help kind of put in mitigation measures in place or probably divert the project from one place to a less sensitive area. So, those sort of things are attempted by closely engaging with the forest department. So, yeah, if you look at the latest findings that we got, the latest studies that we did in 23-24, we've actually found that in this entire landscape, stretching from the Sayadri Tiger Reserve till the border of Goa and Karnataka, there are over 10 packs of dholes actually. I'm just being very conservative, but there must easily be 100 dholes here, which is really good. And in the southern part, from Radhanagri Sanctuary to the Kali Tiger Reserve of Karnataka and the PAs in Goa, there are a lot more, but I think conservatively there are at least 35 tigers now. So, a place which people write off and say, oh, but that's a very marginal habitat, or that's not a place where you can do much conservation. I don't believe that. I believe that if you work in a place long term, you can slowly and eventually help wildlife recover by improving the forest management, by working with the forest department, by working with local environmental bodies as well. And why do we need to do this? People might ask you, okay, wildlife conservation and all is okay, but what are people getting out of it? So to tell you the truth, the cost of damaging these landscapes is far worse and far unimaginable, than we can think of, because the kind of water conservation that the Western Ghats does, the amount of water that these mountains protect, the amount of people's lives that they positively benefit because of their climate impacts, because of their vegetation impacts, because of air purification, everything is for free. Water filtration is for free. All these mountains are giving you a service for free. All you need to do is respect it and protect it. If humans can end up doing that, so many of these services that we get for free, and we never need to pay for them in the future as well. So that is obviously something that people need to protect these mountains for. Second is, many of these mountains are very steep. And if you actually cut off the vegetation on these steep slopes, or you blast through them, you're going to end up killing a lot more people because of landslides. And it's already started happening. A lot of these areas, because of the kind of rainfall we are starting to see, where for, in a month, it rains only for 10 days. And when it rains for 10 days, it rains so much that even the naturally standing forest is unable to bear it. The more we disturb these fragile ecologies, the more problematic it will be for people. So I think this is very important to tell policymakers, and to understand as researchers that we're not doing this for wildlife alone. We're also doing this for the well-being and safety of people living in and around these mountains, as well as far away from them, actually. So yeah, lastly, what we try and do is engage with the media and regional media. What I learned over the years is my English speaking and my English papers and all of these things are not going to change much on the ground unless I am able to make a local connect. And the local connect will happen only when you use the local language. So from learning the local language to trying and working with reporters who are good environmental reporters, trying to give data, give information, and asking them or they approaching me and me telling them good information is crucial to get your point out. As WCT, we believe in that a lot, and we do tend to have a very good social media presence and disseminate our study findings widely. So I think the most important and last learning that I want to share is conservation is a very, very slow process. It's a long-term endeavor. So don't be disheartened if you want to get something done. Your study may say something, but nobody will act on it. Being patient is key. Being, at that place, working in the long term, trying to engage with the people that can make that difference. Whether it is the forest department, whether it is local politicians, whether it is local grassroots conservationists, whether they are environmental activists. Your role as a conservationist is that of a catalyst. So if you can play that role, uh, surely somewhere you will see that taste of success, where you have a small area protected or a large area protected. So it really depends on your objective. But yeah, being patient is something that you should bear in mind. So in the future, what's happening now is we are doing conservation in the area, but because of wild animals, the marginal communities that live in these areas, they are suffering conflict. So, for example, tigers are coming in and killing their livestock, or leopards have already been doing that. And as populations increase in these human-dominated areas of wildlife, you're going to have conflict with marginalized people living at the peripheries of the forest or inside the forest. So the whole idea now in the future for our program uh, by WCT in the Sayadri landscape is to tackle conflict. So here you can see elephant dung in the middle of a sugarcane field. And elephants love sugarcane. Once they raid a sugarcane field, it's very, very difficult to get them out of it. So these sort of conflicts are rife in the area. There is a small herd of elephants there, but they still damage agricultural crop worth crores every year. So, the compensation amounts are increasing every year. People are nevertheless unhappy. So, how do we resolve at least mitigate these conflicts? I think that's going to be the real picture ahead everywhere. In all the states where we have seen good conservation happen and wild animals populations have increased, you're seeing conflict. So, decreasing or mitigating conflict should be the way conservationists start thinking, because just doing our research is not going to help. Unless we can provide benefits to marginal local communities, the research alone is of little value otherwise. So to end the talk, I have a very nice quote by George Schaller. I keep reading this book, A Naturalist and Other Beasts, uh, quite often. Whenever I feel a bit depressed about what I'm doing, I go back and read it. So it says, I learned long ago that conservation has no victories, that one must retain connections and remain involved with animals and places that have captured the heart to prevent their destruction. I am sometimes asked why, given a world that is more wounded and scarred, I do not simply give up, burdened by pessimism. But conservation is my life. I must retain hope. I think this is a very, very important message from this very acclaimed scientist, George Schaller, who has done seminal work in the field. But more than his scientific work, I think his emotional work is what appeals to me. Because at the end of the day, there will be days while you're doing work and you feel very lonely. You feel very alone and you feel very distraught that after doing everything, nothing is working. I think going back to such messages is very important, that, giving up is not a choice. Conservation as a career is not for everyone. But for those of you who end up making that choice, and for those of you who decide that this is my calling, do not give up hope, whatever the circumstance. So I think my talk is over, and but before I end my talk, some acknowledgements are due. My funders, the organization I work with, of course, WCT, the Maharashtra Forest Department, who I very closely work with, and the Sahyadri Tiger Reserve. They have completely supported our research work in the landscape. Our long-term donors, Vinati Organics Limited and BNP Paribas, and also the past data that I shared. A lot of organizations were involved where I was part of different organizations or I got various grants. So all of them are also acknowledged. And yeah, this is the end of it. And I'm happy to answer any questions any of you may have.